Welcome back and thanks for joining us. We've been bringing you live coverage of U.S. President Trump's visit to South Korea today. And just a few hours ago, as the world closely observed, Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un shook hands, even crossing the military demarcation line over to the north. A 1-hour-long summit followed the historic encounter, which Trump assessed as legendary. Following the summit, President Trump and President Moon Jae-in officially confirmed that the stalled nuclear talks will resume between Pyongyang and Washington, saying that working-level talks will take place in the next 2 to 3 weeks. President Trump has wrapped up his 2-day visit to South Korea by addressing the U.S. troops at Osan Air Base. So a historical moment indeed that we witnessed this afternoon at the DMZ, which was closely watched by observers around the world. Leaders of South Korea and the U.S. have confirmed that working-level talks will resume, but will it lead to concrete progress on denuclearization talks? Let's first connect to Mark Berry, Associate Editor of the International Journal on World Peace, for more clues. Thank you so much for joining us, and we apologize for keeping you wait for too long. We know you've stayed up all night in New York watching this historic handshake take place in the DMZ. So after his hour-long talks with Kim Jong-un, Trump said that there will be teams from both sides working together for the next 2 to 3 weeks. What do you think will be their top agenda, and what kind of progress can we anticipate?
Well, I think the key is that the North Koreans are going to probably put foreign ministry people on this, because they know how to negotiate on a government-to-government level. You can't have an intelligence chief like Kim Young-chol was to do that kind of stuff, because he's got a different institution to protect. So my feeling is that they're getting the right people into place, and at the same time, they see that President Trump is consistent. And I think Kim Jong-un, as his father and his grandfather before him, were always looking for a consistent partner in the United States, someone who would engage them, treat them with respect, and be able to make progress with them. And I think we've reached that moment today.
This unprecedented exchange between the North Korean and U.S. leaders was certainly great for optics. We saw them shaking hands multiple times and smiling while commending each other profusely. Does this friendly meeting indicate the two sides may be more willing to make more concessions in their denuclearization talks?
I think it will take time, but I think that's why President Trump repeats over and over again that he's in no rush. He knows these are sensitive, complicated matters, and it takes a lot of hard negotiating. The 1994 agreed framework that was originally brought up to President Jimmy Carter when he visited Kim Il-sung was not concluded till late October of '94. And that was just simply in terms of freezing the nuclear program. And Bob Gallucci had a lot of work on his hands to make that happen. I imagine Ambassador Began is going to have even far more work to be able to make something that would be a permanent resolution of the nuclear issue, even though it may put a ceiling and a freeze on their program and not necessarily reduce their nuclear stockpile to zero.
Now, President Trump confirmed that he has invited Kim Jong-un to visit the U.S. When do you see an official third summit happening between them?
Well, the third summit, I think, would not happen until the fall. And whether the circumstances are right based on what they agree upon for him to be invited to Washington is conjectural. I think it may be easier to have a third official summit after there's a lot of agreement that can be signed as a joint statement, as they were unable to do in Hanoi in February. But perhaps President Trump, as an interim measure, can invite to meet Chairman Kim in Hawaii. And then Washington would be the bonus in 2020.
Now, the focal point today, as President Moon Jae-in said, was the meeting of the North Korean and U.S. leaders. But President Moon also said inter-Korean talks are set to resume thereafter. What kind of role do you see the South Korean leader to help further drive the progress?
Frankly, I credit him with this happening today. When he visited Washington on April 11th, we know that in the White House, he offered this suggestion of not just coming to South Korea, but that We know you didn't get a chance to visit the DMZ back in November of 2017. Maybe something can happen in the DMZ where you could shake hands, if you will, with Chairman Kim. So President Moon, frankly and objectively, deserves the credit for the success today, first and foremost. And it's notable that President Trump, on several occasions, noted the graciousness and the warmth of the First Lady, of the South Korean First Lady, Madam Kim. So really, first of all, the President and the First Lady of the ROK have done a very important groundwork. But also we know that Chairman Kim has promised that he would make a return visit to Seoul in reciprocation for the Pyongyang summit of last September. So my hope would be that perhaps in the fall a summit can also take place in Seoul to make up for the delay, frankly, that was expected to occur last December.
Dr. Mark Berry, Associate Editor of the International Journal on World Peace, joining us through Skype. Thank you so much for your insights today.
Have a good evening.
Another historic moment on this eventful Sunday was when Presidents Moon and Trump went to the DMZ together, a first time that's ever been done. Our Kan Yong-woo fills us in on their trip to the border area.
The leaders of South Korea and the U.S. toured the demilitarized zone together before meeting with the North Korean leader at the border village of Panmunjom. Moon and Trump visited observation post Olet just south of the borderline separating the two Koreas, a place where U.S. presidents have gone while visiting the DMZ in the past. They looked over into the north and were briefed by soldiers. Then they went to Camp Boniface to meet with South Korean and American troops.
이 양국의 대통령들이 이곳 비무장지대를 함께 방문한 것은 사상 처음 있는 일입니다.
Well, I want to thank you very much. You're a very special group of people. Just looking at you, look how healthy and how strong and how good, and we really appreciate it. We appreciate it very much.
Both leaders thanked the soldiers of the two countries for their dedicated service at the front line of freedom, as Ronald Reagan once described the DMZ when he went in 1983. Kan Yong-woo, Arirang News.
President Moon says today's meeting between President Trump and Chairman Kim was a great advancement in the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. He was speaking right after the meeting wrapped up. Here's President Moon.
트럼프 대통령님의 아주 과감하고 독창적인 그런 접근 방식에 대해서 경의를 표하고 싶습니다. 한반도의 완전한 비핵화와 항구적 평화를 구축하기 위한 평화 프로세스가 큰 고개를 하나 넘었다는 생각입니다.
He says the event gave the world and the 70 million people of the two Koreas great hope. And with Pyongyang and Washington having agreed to form working-level teams to restart nuclear negotiations, President Moon says he believes good results are on the horizon. All the top headlines from the world's media were on the historic meeting between Trump and Kim at the border between the two Koreas. Media outlets from around the world were quick to report on the news of the somewhat abrupt meeting, and many had their own take on the surprise development. Our Won Jong-han reports.
International media outlets were focused on the news of the historic meeting in the DMZ. Almost every news outlet reported on its front page that Donald Trump became the first sitting U.S. president to cross the border to North Korea after meeting Kim Jong-un in the demilitarized zone. Some global news outlets, including the BBC, first mentioned how critics have dismissed it as pure political theater, mentioning how the previous meeting in Hanoi ended abruptly with no progress on denuclearization talks. But when the talks became longer than expected, the stories started to focus on how Panmunjom could possibly set the scene for future talks. When Donald Trump came out from the meeting room, foreign news outlets including The Guardian covered the story as breaking news, reporting that the two sides will be setting up new teams to take forward negotiations within 2 to 3 weeks. News outlets and Korea's neighbors also showed live coverage of the events in Panmunjom. China's CGTN and Japan's NHK covered the news live for their local viewers. A Japanese professor in the NHK studio called the meeting a significant step towards a new future between the two sides, mentioning how the previous relationship, especially in terms of the denuclearization deal, was somewhat passive. It was an extraordinary moment, and it shows that these two people have personal chemistry. But many global news outlets wonder, can it really lead to something significant? That will be the real test over the next few months. Jong-un, Arirang News.
President Trump met with Korean business leaders in Seoul as well this morning. Our business correspondent Kim Hae-sung now reports on what was discussed.
During his first meeting with top Korean business executives in Seoul, U.S. President Donald Trump expressed his gratitude towards Korean firms and urged them to invest more.
Hyundai, Samsung, and CJ Dosan and SK Group all here this morning. They're all here represented by their top people, and I really appreciate it. They've made very large investments in our country, including the companies represented in the room. They've created more than 50,000 brand new jobs in the United States.
South Korean business representatives from more than a dozen companies, including Samsung Electronics, SK Group, Hyundai Motor Company, and LG Group, were present at the meeting. Trump also thanked Lotte Group chairman Shin Dong-bin for investing $3 billion in the Lotte chemical complex in Louisiana and Korean Air's decision to purchase more passenger jets from Boeing. He added that the U.S. economy is doing well. Investment to the U.S. has increased since 2017, along with lower business tax rates and eased regulations.
There's never been a better time to invest or do business and create jobs in America.
Acknowledging that South Korea and the U.S. will maintain a strong relationship, Trump also praised the amendments to the Korea-U.S. trade agreement that went into effect this January, which includes increased market access for American auto companies. Calling the agreement a win-win for both countries and their citizens, Trump called for balanced trade and co-prosperity. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
For further analysis on this afternoon's major breaking developments, we are once again joined by Dr. Ko Myung-hyun of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Good to have you back.
Thank you.
Let's start off with the overall assessment of the historic encounter at the DMZ today.
Well, it's been very surprising. I mean, there's some fear that this encounter wouldn't be realized until the very last minute. And I think President Trump was very well aware of such a risk, because he actually thanked Chairman Kim for showing up, because otherwise he would have been the target of a severe criticism back home. So essentially it was a gutsy move on the part of President Trump, and also on the part of Chairman Kim. And I think the gamble paid off grandly for President Trump. I think he's the biggest winner of this encounter. Essentially, he's been able to project the image of the United States and himself as the head of it, that is in control of the things. I mean, there's some fear that when the negotiation between Pyongyang and Washington was stalled, other actors could intervene and somehow have influence over North Korea and somehow control North Korea to further the other actors' own strategic interest, such as China and Russia. And I think President Trump, with this surprising meeting, I mean the last minute meeting, has been able to dispel such fear and such concern, because now it's very clear that North Korea puts the most priority on its relations with the United States. I mean, not the country, but with the leader of the United States, the President Trump. So, and also President Trump has been able to show that if he wants, he can actually sit down with Kim Jong-un anytime he wants. So, I mean, essentially did away with the necessity of having to have other countries to mediate the talks between Pyongyang and Washington. So I think, I don't think there's been much substance in the dialogue that went on behind the closed doors between the two leaders. But I think overall, he's been able to project this perception, the optic that the United States is in control, and by extension, he's in control of the situation in the Korean Peninsula.
You've mentioned that President Trump is probably the biggest winner today. Do you think he had the upcoming 2020 U.S. presidential election in mind when he invited Kim Jong-un through tweet?
Well, clearly there's that element too. And then at the beginning, I think most people actually chose that as the preferred explanation for why President Trump was so willing to come to Panmunjom for this uncertain prospect of meeting with Kim Jong-un just for 2 minutes. I mean, that's the president's own words. But then it looks like he had multiple games in mind and multiple dimensions to what could be expected from the outcome. And one is certainly about the political outcome at home. I mean, this is a dramatic event. I mean, and also he shows that President Trump is above all his competitors back home in the potential presidential race. So especially in the opposition, the Democratic Party. So I think he's been able to show that he's somebody. I mean, despite all the criticisms that he receives for not being statesman-like in many instances, he's been able to show that he can actually do things when he wants, and he can reach into most problematic issues and come out with an approach that's totally novel, but then at the same time looks like it's working in a way, at least in the short term. So I think he's been able to repair his reputation and project, the more statesman-like image to the electorate back home.
Now, some experts and some North Korea watchers were skeptical whether this historic encounter would actually lead to further in-depth discussions. But surprisingly, the leaders of South Korea and the U.S., after wrapping up their encounter with Kim Jong-un, have said that working-level talks will resume. Can we expect more substance now on the details of denuclearizing North Korea from this point on?
Well, the resumption of the working-level talks was completely expected. I mean, you expect the outcome of a meeting like this. I mean, when the two top leaders meet in the background of a stalled talks, it's a natural outcome is that the staffers down below will have to resume the dialogue. I mean, it's inevitable. So in that sense, it's totally predictable. But then merely we are shifting the focus from the top-level talks like this one to the working level meeting. And we know that despite the fact that we call it working level meetings, that's where things happen. That's when things are made or broken. We have seen that in Hanoi. I mean, we know that the lack of outcome in the working level meetings preceding the Hanoi summit led to the collapse of the talks in Hanoi. So I think we are seeing the same pattern here. I mean, hopefully this time around, the United States and North Korea should be disposed to a more flexible attitude on each side to make the working level talks successful. I think that's the hope that the United States will go into the talks with. I think the U.S. will expect the North Korea to be more forthcoming, especially providing some sort of concrete and feasible roadmap for denuclearization, probably beyond the Yangbian. And North Korea might be coming into the working level talks expecting that this time around, the United States might be satisfied with just Yangbian. So I think still there's some gap, and President Trump didn't really elaborate on the whether the gap has been shrunk or not. But then I think we should be cautious about our expectation about the upcoming working level meeting.
Now, President Trump has confirmed that the working level talks from the U.S. side will be led by U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Stephen Biegun. Now, if you remember, North Korea has been constantly and very openly discontent about Biegun, along with Pompeo. How do you think North Korea will react to the fact that Washington's lineup of nuclear negotiators remains unchanged?
Well, I think we should focus more. I mean, we should, and then the North Koreans should also focus more on the message rather than the messenger. The reason is, and I think the North Koreans are a lot more pragmatic than they let out to be. I mean, we have this perception that North Koreans are, irrational, sometimes very emotional, but they are not actually. They are actually very good strategic thinkers, and I think that they are going to watch out for any change, any positive, change the message from the United States, from Pompeo and then Steve Biegun, in the direction that favors North Korea. If that's the case, I think the North Koreans will be very happy to receive them again with open arms.
Today we saw President Moon Jae-in not attending the summit. It was supposed to be a three-way summit, but President Moon Jae-in did not attend the talks. Did you see this coming, and what kind of reaction do you expect from the Korean people as well as Korea's political arena?
Even though I think President Moon has benefited from the three-way encounter and the bilateral meeting that followed, I think the whole uptake was quite awkward, especially for the President Moon. I mean, there's some indication that that could be the case because North Korea has been lately, I mean, even yesterday, has been very negative about South Korean president. I mean, blaming him for not doing enough for the inter-Korean dialogue, and also for South Korea being so much under the influence of the United States and so forth. So they've been very negative about it. And also, it looked like North Korea didn't want to give the benefit to South Korea being the intermediary between Washington and Pyongyang. So it's natural for North Korea to exclude President Moon from the bilateral meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un. So it was actually, in a way, predictable. But on the other hand, there's some, I think we also had this expectation that North Korea being North Korea, and then they have to think about what will happen after, the end of the dialogue with the United States. They have to continue with the, inter-Korean dialogue, and how are they going to justify the continuation of dialogue having embarrassed President Moon so much. So I thought that, it would be too awkward for North Korea to exclude President Moon the way we have seen in Panmunjom today. But then that's what happened. I think that's going to have, despite all the upside of this meeting for President Moon, I think it will have a repercussions in the domestic standing. And starting tomorrow, I think the opposition party are going to criticize him for what happened today.
All right, Dr. Kool, thank you as always for your perspectives today.
My pleasure.
What began as a summit between Presidents Moon and Trump turned into a historic day on the inter-Korean border. Presidents Moon and Trump believe that the meeting today at the DMZ will help speed up Korean peace drive that seemed to have reached an impasse. Our Shin Se-min with more.
Presidents Moon Jae-in of South Korea and Donald Trump of the U.S. expressed optimism that a meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un at the DMZ Sunday would speed up the denuclearization process. Speaking shortly after the 8th Moon-Trump summit,
오늘 평화로 가는 방법을 한반도가 증명할 수 있게 되어 저는 매우 마음이 벅찹니다. 지속적인 대화는 한반도의 완전한 비핵화를 이루는 현실성이 있는 유일한 방법입니다.
President Moon noted that the meeting is the first time the leaders of both Pyongyang and Washington have ever met at Panmunjom, sitting on the borderline of the divided Koreas.
What we're doing today is a step, and probably it's a step in the right direction. There's a good feeling, so it could be very good. As far as another meeting, I think let's see what happens today before we start thinking about that. But it could be very important.
And part of that good feeling, says Trump, is a good partnership with President Moon. According to a readout by South Korea's presidential office, Trump expressed appreciation for the active role President Moon has played as a peacemaker, noting a drastic shift in mood on the Korean Peninsula. A highly anticipated three-way summit between leaders Moon, Kim, and Trump did not happen, as President Moon yielded the spotlight to Kim and Trump and their meeting.
오늘 이 중심은 북미 간의 대화입니다. 트럼프 대통령님과 북한 김정은 위원장과의 상봉 그리고 대화 또 그것이 앞으로 계속된 북미 대화로 이어져 나가는 그 과정으로서 큰 의미가 있다고 생각합니다.
Moon added that through the meeting at the border, the two Koreas will be able to reaffirm peace and the world will give support to leaders Kim and Trump. Given the progress made in the past 2 years since Moon and Trump took office, the leaders seemed sure that they will eventually achieve a nuclear-free Korean Peninsula. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
There were several historical firsts at today's meeting at the DMZ. For the first time ever, a U.S. president stepped into North Korea, and the leaders of the two sides held a summit at the DMZ, not to mention the leaders of the two Koreas also meeting all together with the leader of the U.S. For more, here's our Lee Ji-won.
In a ripple effect started by U.S. President Donald Trump's tweet, the historic and impromptu meeting between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and President Trump took place at the truce village of Panmunjom on Sunday. After touring the demilitarized zone with President Moon Jae-in, President Trump walked to the military demarcation line that divides the two Koreas. There, just like during the first inter-Korean summit in April 2018, Kim Jong-un greeted Trump at the border, saying how he never expected to see President Trump there. Kim then took Trump to the northern side, making him the first U.S. president to set foot on North Korean soil. It's also the first time in 66 years since the armistice agreement that North Korea and U.S. have met at the border village. After a brief photo shoot, the two crossed over to the South Korean side, exchanging brief comments on the surprise meeting.
이 트럼프 대통령께서 분기선을 넘어서 다시는 하지 말라는 저치하는 그 과거를 청산하고 앞으로 좋은 밤날을 개척하는 트럼프 대통령의 그 남다른 영단의 그 분이라고 생각합니다.
I just want to say that this is my honor. I didn't really expect it. We were in Japan for the G20. We came over and I said, hey, I'm over here. I want to call Chairman Kim. And we got to meet, and stepping across that line was a great honor. A lot of progress has been made.
President Trump also said they liked each other from day one and that he would invite Kim to the White House right now. The two leaders were then joined by South Korean President Moon Jae-in, and this marked another historic moment as the leaders of the two Koreas and the leader of the U.S. finally all met together. Though the details could not be heard, the leaders got to enjoy about 4 minutes of three-way talks, standing at the symbolic place of peace. The leaders of North Korea and the U.S. then moved to the Freedom House on the South Korean side to hold their de facto third bilateral meeting, which lasted for 53 minutes.
어떤 사람들은 일부에서는 뭐 대통령께서 보내신 친서를 내가 보면서 미리 사전에 합의된 만남이 아닌가 이런 말들도 하던데 사실 난 어제 아침에 대통령께서 그런 의향을 표시하신 걸 보고 나 역시 깜짝 놀랐고 정식으로 오늘 여기서 만날 걸 제안하시는 말씀을 오후 늦은 시간에야 이렇게 알게 됐습니다. 나도 각하를 다시 만나고 싶고 또 이 만남 자체가 특히나 이런 장소에서 만나면 우리 북과 남 사이에는 분단의 상징이고 또 이렇게 나쁜 과거를 연상케 하게 되는 이런 자리에서 오랜 적대적 관계였던 우리 두 나라가 이렇게 여기서 평화의 악수를 하는 것 자체가 어제와 달라진 오늘을 표현하는 것이고 앞으로 더 좋게 우리가 변할 수 있다는 걸 모든 사람들한테 보여주는 만남이라고 난 긍정적으로 생각했고 또 앞으로 우리가 하는 행동에 긍정적인 영향을 미칠 수 있다고 생각했습니다.
At a quick briefing after the meeting, President Trump said both sides agreed to resume working-level talks soon.
So we've agreed to have teams set up. We're going to have the United States will have a team. Secretary of State Pompeo will pick it. We already know the gentleman. Good luck, Steve. Thanks, sir. Hawaii.
Having said that he hopes the focus of Sunday's
situation.
visit to the DMZ goes to Trump and Kim, South Korean president said today's events gave hope to not just the Koreans on both sides, but to the world as well.
오늘의 만남을 통해서 한반도의 완전한 비핵화와 항구적 평화를 구축하기 위한 평화 프로세스가 큰 고개를 하나 넘었다는 생각입니다. 양측에서 실무협상 대표를 선정해서 빠른 시일 내에 실무협상에 돌입하기로 한 것만으로도 앞으로 좋은 결과가 성급 눈앞에 다가왔다고 생각합니다. 큰 기대를 가지고
이지원, 아리랑 뉴스.
Today, we saw a historic encounter between visiting U.S. President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, who managed to show up to the DMZ on a very short notice. Their summit of high significance have led to the resumption of stalled nuclear negotiations between Pyongyang and Washington, and hopes are high that we can expect concrete progress in denuclearizing North Korea. A truly historic day for all of us here in Seoul, but we'll leave it there for now. From all of us here at Arirang, thank you for watching and good night. We can see U.S. President Donald Trump walking out of the Panmunjom
He is coming out of the building in the South Korean side of the inter-Korean truce village of Panmunjom called the House of